Okay, Dave, shall we get on to the main topic?
We're going to get on to the main topic, Rob, and that is Season 5 of Doctor Who, brackets, and Fandom, close brackets.
Yes.
So, I guess, let me pitch to you at the very start my thinking when I suggested this episode to you.
Mm-hmm.
When I go back to my time in fandom when I was young, first involved, Season 5 was the classic season. It was the monster season. It was hit after hit after hit. It had the classic early Doctor Who TARDIS team. It was just Doctor Who at its absolute greatest, at its absolute pinnacle. Since then, there have been all sorts of re-evaluations, and it's slid and it's come back and it's slid further, and you know, Victoria particularly has really come in for a bit of a beating in these last few years. And I wanted to have a look at this season and go, where does it really stand, and why has it had such a contentious and controversial view? I mean, I really struggle to think of any era of the show that's fluctuated in fan wisdom so much as this season.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm not always in sync with fandom on this, and we'll get to this later. There's one story here that I always thought was great, and which fandom has only recently decided was great, for example. So I've never been fully in sync with fandom, but I know exactly what you mean about this series. And I guess, you know, we could probably start by saying how a lot of the episodes for this series have only been found in recent decades. They didn't exist probably at the time you were first getting into Who.
No, in fact, when you and I, Rob, were first in fandom, of this entire season, 5 episodes existed.
5 episodes in a 60s season is nothing, because they have so many episodes in a 60s season. To only have 5, you may as well not have any.
Well, it's 5 out of 40.
Yeah, that's right.
So they, of course, were Abominable Snowman 2, Enemy of the World 3, Web of Fear 1, and Wheel in Space 3 and 6.
Yeah.
Now, since then, interestingly enough, every one of the finds in this season has not just added to the season, but has been, you know, a seismic fandom event. I can remember, for example, when the 4 episodes of The Ice Warriors were found in about 1990-91.
Yeah, I think 88 might have been.
88? Was it that early?
Yeah.
Okay, maybe it took a while to circulate amongst fandom.
They found them in an old BBC Enterprises building. They were moving out, and I think they were like behind a filing cabinet or in a filing cabinet or something just absolutely bonkers. That's where those Ice Warriors ones came from. Yeah, August of 88.
Yeah, I can remember very bad bootleg copies of those circulating, complete with a little time code down the bottom.
Yeah.
But yeah, so they were found. Of course, Tomb was found completely in Hong Kong.
That's right. Yeah, a company called Rediffusion in late 91.
Yeah, so there you had a whole story and 2/3 of a story come back, so now we get more of it. Yeah. And of course, in 2013, we had the big find.
Yeah, the really big find. Both coming from a relay station in Nigeria, found by Philip Morris, who's a name many Who fans will know. Web of Fear and Enemy of the World. What an amazing find from the one location. And so recently, too, you think after many decades, all this stuff would be gone.
Yeah, that really was incredible. And the result now is that we have 22 of the 40 episodes existing. Fury from the Deep is the only one that has nothing existing.
Yeah.
Although Abominable Snowman only has the 1 episode out there still. So, look, obviously that is going to change fandom's opinion, and these stories do get a bit of a re-evaluation. But before we go into that, Rob, when we decided to do this topic, you set yourself a bit of a mission that I thought was biting off a little bit more than you could chew, yes. And that was to read all the Target novels. How did you go?
Yes, I didn't get anywhere near finishing them, Dave. It was an epic for me just to find all of them in my big pile of Doctor Who books, and then by the time I found them, I was too tired to read. No, I got them all out. I took a picture. I said, I'm going to do this. But I just found time got away on me, and even Target novels, which is so easy to read, I was just too distracted. We even had a long weekend. I was just too distracted, and I didn't get through them. But what I did read was, you know, reminding me of these stories and reminding me how much I enjoy reading Target novels, which I haven't done for so long. And I think they're probably a good way to enjoy these stories if people want to pick them up in this format. Well, in the case of Fury from the Deep, this is probably the best format to pick them up in, unless you're into reconstructions and things.
I'll pitch the audio CD.
Really?
I'm a big fan of that, but we'll talk more about that when we get to Fury. But I'm looking at the list now, Rob.
Yes.
There's not a bad Target novel among that list, is there?
No, there's not. And they're all written by a lot of different people. It's not like these are all Terrence Dicks ones. I don't have them in front of me. I think only 2 of them were Terrence Dicks ones. I think we had a Jerry Davis and a Victor Pemberton and some others.
Yeah, Ian Marter.
Yeah.
Yeah, he did one. And Fury from the Deep, of course, was that big bumper volume that was a really in-depth and really well-written book.
Absolutely, that was a huge thing for the time, and even though it kind of annoyed me as one of those OCD type fans, because I put it on the shelf, I thought, oh, it's much thicker than all the other ones. I don't like how that looks.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah. So let's start with Tomb, because I think Tomb is kind of the story that all of this season does flow around in many ways, and kind of crystallises a lot of the opinion.
Yes.
Fair to say that before it was discovered, there was no doubt this was a classic.
Yep.
The novel is brilliant.
Yep.
The legend is that when it was found, it went through this massive reevaluation. But I've got to say, that's not my memory. And I went back and I pulled out the local fanzine from after this was first screened at a club meeting, and all the reviews were incredibly positive about it. And even now, in the DWM Top 250 survey a couple of years ago, it came in at 23.
Yeah. Look, I was out of fandom at this time. You know, we spoke about this on the Virgin New Adventures episode. I was out of fandom, so I can't attest to have any first-hand knowledge. But my sense has always been, yes, it was regarded as a classic beforehand. It was regarded as iconic, the Cybermen breaking out of their tombs. The fact it was Cybermen at all, and I don't know anyone who really, really dislikes this. It doesn't sort of have a reputation like, I don't know, Twin Dilemma or something like that. I've always regarded this well myself, and I've always perceived it to be regarded well.
It's one of those ones where you have so many conversations of people saying, I know that this is now far less regarded than it used to be, but I personally really like it.
Yeah. Maybe they just want to think they like something that's not well regarded anymore. Maybe it's a hipster thing, Dave.
Yeah, look, maybe. and look, there is the aspect to it of some fans picking the plot apart. Now, I would actually say that all the aspects of the Tomb of the Cyberman plot actually do work. You know, people talk about why does the Doctor tell them not to go down to the tombs whilst helping them in? Well, that's really clear. It's because the Doctor knows that if he doesn't go down to the tombs and works out what's going on with the Cybermen, somebody eventually will, and that could be a really bad thing. So he has to investigate whilst giving the humans a chance to go away. Why does he lock the cyber controller into the power cabinet thingy? Well, he makes it really clear that he just wants to lock him in there and overload him with the electricity and the recharge, but doesn't count on him being able to smash his way out of the door. You know, everything in this works in plot terms. That said, though, we probably need to mention Toberman.
I think I know what aspect of Toberman you're going to talk about too.
Well, what's your perception then, Rob?
Is it the perception of him, and when I think of him, I also think of maybe the strong man and terror of the Autons, and just the way big, powerful black men are perceived in Doctor Who?
Yeah, you know, I'm as you know, Rob, somebody who doesn't push back against this sort of narrative, but certainly has a critical look at, you know, talking about Doctor Who being problematic or racist or whatever it is. Toberman is one, though, that I really, really can't push back against at all. It is a very unfortunate portrayal of essentially a black slave.
Yeah, I was going to say, I wasn't even going to use the word slave, but yeah, okay. If we're going to go there, yeah. It
is kind of how he's signalled and how he's treated. He's essentially owned by Kaftan.
Yeah,
and that's very unfortunate. And he's, you know, the simple-minded strong man. That's a bit unfortunate.
Although, you know, I'll just jump in, just mentioning Kaftan. That to me, though, is a very progressive kind of character. I mean, this is the mid-60s.
Yeah, and
we've got this Middle Eastern woman who's incredibly powerful in this story.
Yeah, no, I would agree. And interestingly enough, actually, we'll park that thought, because there's more to come, I think, as we go across the season with that.
Mm-hmm.
I was just going to finish up with Toberman and say, I think one reason why I never really noticed it for a long time is because in the novel, he is extremely sympathetically portrayed.
That is true too, yes.
So I think that helps to understand maybe what the production team was doing, but it doesn't quite work on screen, I'm sorry.
Yeah, on screen is the problem. And it's funny, though, because I guess I read it first as a novel before it was ever found, before
Likewise.
I ever saw it.
Likewise.
So maybe I've always watched it kind of feeling for him in the same way because I read the novel first, if that makes any sense.
No, it absolutely does, and I guess that's the point I was trying to make. I can still remember reading the Tomb of the Cybermen novel and the intense empathy and sympathy you have with Toberman, and that does help to carry me through the television version of him. And I think it is there. I mean, his ending is a very noble one. It's just unfortunate that it's sort of wrapped up in this black slave, simple portrayal.
Yeah, agreed.
But the Cybermen, they're so cool in this.
Yeah, they... Well, I am an unabashed Cyberman fan. You know, I like all Cyberman stories, even the really naff ones, because I just really like them. And I'll happily say that they're seldom done well on television. But here, in 60s black and white, with that music as they bust out of the tombs, the fact they're in a tomb, oh my God, I love this story, Dave.
Yeah, and I've got to say, one of the things that I want to talk about as we go through this season is to look at it through the lens of, are they all the same? Are they all this, in inverted commas, base under siege trope? I would contend Tomb is not. They are not in a base under siege. If anything, they are besieging a base.
Well, indeed, yes, they come from the outside into the tomb, yes.
Yeah, I mean, they can leave that tomb at any time. I mean, okay, there's the whole thing about they can't spend the night at the ship because it's packed. But once they're outside of that tomb level, they're actually reasonably safe, and they could have just disappeared any time they wanted. They're not under siege, and nor is there a crazy base commander.
No, not at all.
All right, well, this is the first one that is, quote, not the same as the others.
Okay.
Do you perhaps want to give us your thoughts on the Abominable Snowman?
Yeah, I've had an interesting background with this one. It's probably the story in this season I'm least acquainted with, and I never got into as much as the other stories in the season. I do like the Great Intelligence as an enemy, and I've spoken about that in past episodes of our show, but that's primarily come through Web of Fear, more so than this one. But that said, I like the fact that Doctor Who had gone somewhere different in terms of location for this, and the involvement of the monks and so on. I always felt this was kind of, I guess it was a 60s kind of thing, wasn't it? Around this time, people were thinking about monks and hippies and all sorts of, Eastern type things, and for them to be popping up in Doctor Who makes a whole lot of sense. The Yeti, I think, are quite interesting, but it is, for me, not the weakest, by no means the weakest story in this season, but it's one of the weaker stories in this season for me. Interestingly,
this is one that I came to in a slightly unusual way. I've mentioned in the past how back in the 80s, when I was a member of the Doctor Who Club of Victoria, they had an audio library where you could borrow cassettes of the soundtrack of a lot of episodes. They had Abominable Snowman Part 1 to 4, not Parts 5 and 6.
Interesting.
So, and I don't know why that was. So I can remember very early on having a really bad copy of the first 4 parts of this story and getting into it and never knowing how it finished. Even now, that's still sort of a bit of a vague memory. But again, it has that really atmospheric sort of feeling. The portrayal of the monks is really lovely, and they just have these wonderful lyrical voices, and the way that Padmasambhava changes from that old spiritual voice to the harsh voice of the Great Intelligence. The Yetis, they look great. Troughton is in great form. I think Victoria and Jamie are in great form. Professor Travis is great. It is a hard story to judge because it is so missing. Yeah, I think that's part of my problem with it as well. It's one of the older Target novels. It wasn't one of the new ones coming out that I was reading. I have an interesting relationship with this story, but I know enough about it and I've read it before. It's just not the best story in this season for me. No, but you are right, Rob, that it does take the TARDIS somewhere other than contemporary Britain.
Yes, or space.
Or space, yeah. I mean, it's 1930s Asia, which is a very unusual location for Doctor Who.
Yeah, it's kind of an Indiana Jones sort of setting, if anything.
Yeah, it is. And you get all these lovely little references to Tibetan culture, like the Holy Gunter and stuff like that, which I love. Now, it comes in at 87 in the DWM poll, which isn't too bad for something that's 5/6 missing.
Yeah, and old.
And old, yeah.
Yeah.
Is it a base under siege? There's no crazy base commander.
No.
And it is an unusual location. It is under siege.
Yeah.
But only just.
Yeah. It's borderline. It's not a traditional base under siege by any means, to my mind.
It's not what we think of as base under siege, is it?
No, not at all.
All right, well, we'll cross that one off that list as well.
I think I can see where you're going with this episode, Dave.
We now get to one that I've perhaps got a different view on, and that's the Ice Warriors.
Okay.
Because this is one where I probably am a bit more in sync with fandom, if not a little bit more so. I remember having very fond episodes of this as a kid. Again, based on the Target novel, and that wonderful evocative white cover with the imposing Ice Warrior and Victoria screaming. That was just such a memory for me.
Yeah.
And I do love the Ice Warriors, even though they're not in a set of particularly great stories. I mean, I really like Curse of Peladon, and I quite like Seeds of Death, but they're also in Monster of Peladon.
Mm-hmm.
And this. but the Ice Warriors, I've always thought, are the quintessential 60s Doctor Who monster. Like, if you say monster, you think Ice Warriors. Big, green Martians stomping around and hissing.
Yes. Yeah, they're much more of a monster than a Dalek or even a Cyberman, for example.
Yeah, and they're more interesting and talkative than a Yeti or a Quark.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. So I've got a lot of affection for the Ice Warriors themselves. I do think that this is a very poor story, though. I think it's by far the weakest story. I think it's the only weak story, frankly, in this season. And that's because the plot actually doesn't go anywhere. It is literally 5.5 episodes of people standing around going, well, we can't use our weapon to destroy the Ice Warrior ship because if it's got the wrong sort of engines, it'll blow up and destroy us all. And then getting to 10 minutes from the end and going, oh, you know what, let's just try and see what happens.
Yeah, I'm not enamoured with this story either. It is bottom of this season for me.
Yeah, and it does very poorly in the polling in DWM as well. It comes in at 141.
Wow.
Which is quite low, particularly for something with such a classic monster. This is one we probably have to say is a quintessential base under siege.
I think so, for sure.
Yeah, it's the futuristic setting. Leader Clint, he doesn't go totally bonkers, but he does get quite flustered and nutty at a few stages. It's got the monster that's attacking the base from the outside. This I will pay is a base under siege story.
Yes, agreed.
And a weak one.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, moving on, Dave, this is the story I was alluding to earlier where the fan wisdom is that, people never liked this, and then we found it and everyone thought it was great. I always thought this was great. Whenever I hear that point of view, I think, are you nuts? Like, did you never read the novel? Did you never look at the still photos and see that Patrick Troughton was playing the two roles? And how interesting was that? And, I thought this was always really perceived quite well. But people say, oh, no, we all thought it was crap, until we saw it. That was not my experience at all.
It's interesting you say that. I would say that it wasn't so much thought of as crap as just forgotten.
Okay.
Particularly as, look, the episode that existed, part 3, we now know, is the weakest one of the story. It is that classic middle of a 6-parter story where you've done a couple of episodes of setup and you've got everything going, and then you just sort of need to put everything in its place before hitting the conclusion in the second half of the story. And we get that. I was actually quite down on it, I've got to confess, Rob, for a long time. And there's a couple of reasons for it. One is that I read the novel when I was very young, and it is not a young kid's novel.
No.
It is very, very violent. It is very, very graphic. I can still remember being quite traumatised, if you like, by... There's a scene where Salamander like sticks a stalagmite through someone's head or something.
I vaguely remember that. Yep.
Yeah, it's the guy down in the hidden survivors base who convinces Salamander to take him outside and see the world, and Salamander sticks this stalactite through his eye or something.
Yeah, hilarity ensues.
Yeah, and I remember being a kid and really not appreciating that, or frankly getting what the story was about. I also do think that Enemy of the World is structurally flawed in some ways, in that the entire secondary plot with those, nuclear survivors, whatever you want to call them, I think comes in a bit too late.
Okay.
And I also think that there's a little bit too much of the Doctor standing around saying, "No, I'm not going to impersonate Salamander. I don't know who the good guys and the bad guys in this situation are. For all I know, you're the bad guys and he's the good. I don't know. Why would I get involved?" In between which you see Salamander being unequivocally the baddie.
Yes.
So it kind of makes the Doctor look a little bit dull. Now, when you're listening to that in an audio, that is very, very important. In an audio, structure and timing and everything are really, really important because you have no visuals to set them free. But when it was discovered, we suddenly had visuals, and you can be a lot more forgiving about that. Particularly, I think a lot of its reputation now does sit on part one.
Oh, really? Because of what, the location filming, or?
Yeah, the location filming and Troughton's performance on the beach and the helicopters. I think that was such a contrast to what we expected that people go, "Wow, this is amazing." And I'm not saying that the other five are bad, but I'm saying that is so good that it does lift reasonably good episodes to follow.
Yeah. Oh, look, I can go with that. But I still like this very much as a story and was never really against it.
Yeah, and I guess what I'm saying is I have learned to really like it. I don't think it's the classic some people do, but it is certainly, I appreciate it a lot more having seen it. There is no doubt that its reputation has gone up. In the poll, it came in at 56, which isn't bad.
Okay, it's good.
For a story that does lack a traditional Doctor Who sort of motif and certainly lacks a traditional Doctor Who monster.
I was going to say, I was mentioning, with Abominable Snowman, themes that might have jived in the 60s. I think the sort of James Bond sort of vibe that is in this story to me. I think Salamander is a great James Bond villain.
Yeah, he is really good. He's really good.
And I think that might have appealed to 60s viewers as well. I think that Doctor Who's doing something different here.
Yeah, absolutely. And can we say this is unequivocally, definitely 100% not a base under siege?
I think we can.
I think we can.
Now, Dave, I know this to be true, so I'll just mention here, at the end of episode 6 of this story, the BBC actually broadcast a very special trailer with Patrick Troughton warning viewers that there was a new, more frightening version of the Yeti coming.
Is that right?
That is right.
I didn't know that.
Yes, which leads into, of course, the Web of Fear. The
Web of Fear. This is one that I think the fan wisdom is, it used to be a top 10 classic and now it's not.
Yes.
All that said, though, the Doctor Who magazine survey has it at 16.
Good God, that's high. That's very high.
It is very high, and it is the highest of the season.
That boggles my mind a bit, because surely that's based on people having seen it now.
Yeah, well, definitely the DVDs were out by the time that survey was done.
But if
Enemy of the World had lifted up to the 50s, but Web of Fear, it was in the top 20 before it was found, and it's still in the top 20 after it's found.
That boggles my mind, because if I sit this alongside Enemy of the World, I think Enemy of the World is much more enjoyable to watch. But that's just a personal point of view. But, to be up near 16, or to be 16, that's... Whew, I'm shocked at that, actually.
Yeah, and this is what I'm saying. This idea that it is a less loved season than it used to be is starting to fall down a bit as a theory, because its best story is in the top 20. And I'm not shocked. I remember there were a lot of people when the Web of Fear came out who did a couple of things. One, they were trying to repeat that Tomb of the Cybermen narrative. That it was a classic. We all thought it was a classic. We were told it was a classic. Then we saw it, and it wasn't as good as we thought it was, and the memory cheats, and it's all gone down. That's clearly not the case. The other thing was people were so keen and so excited by how good they'd found Enemy of the World to be that they almost had to sort of knock Web of Fear down to make Enemy of the World come up. Like, well, Web of Fear was kind of what we expected, maybe even not as good, but how good was Enemy of the World?
Yeah, I think there was definitely a bit of that going on. Again, for me, I wasn't building up Enemy of the World because I already liked it, but I think broadly, you're hitting on what was going on, yes.
Yeah, and I don't think there was anything to be disappointed by. It was still... The sets that we could see in part one, which did exist, were just as good in the other 5 parts. You got Nicholas Courtney added to the cast, which is only going to improve things. And what a portrayal! Like that scene in, I think, the end of part 4, where Lieutenant Colonel Lethbridge Stewart, and he's Lieutenant Colonel, check his rank slide, he's not a colonel. I don't know where that's come from. Anyway, where Lieutenant Colonel Lethbridge Stewart breaks down, he just says, "It's hopeless. It's hopeless. How can we fight them?" And that would have been a powerful enough scene watching it in 1968. You know, a member of the military elite breaking down and defeated. But we've now had all the rest of the history of Lethbridge Stewart to come and to know and to love, and to see him break down on screen. Wow, that was powerful.
Yeah.
But yeah, so he's been added to the cast. The Yeti, I think, are great. The sets are still great. The scene at Covent Garden, the Battle of Covent Garden, that is brilliant. For something shot in 1968, that is superb.
Yeah, and even just like the Tube in general, I mean, there's that great story that the people who run the Tube were very pissed off that the BBC had asked, could we film? They said no, and then they saw this on TV and thought the BBC had gone and done some guerrilla shooting or something down in the Tube at night or something. They were convinced, absolutely convinced it was real, and it was just a set.
Yeah, it really was quite extraordinary. So I actually don't think there was anything to be disappointed by in this. If you'd read the novel, you'd seen part 1, you'd probably listened to the BBC audio CDs. This delivered what you expected, and it hasn't moved in the charts. And I think that it is as good as its reputation suggests.
Yeah, look, I think it's a great story. It's not one of my top stories from this season. You know, I'm liking The Tomb of the Cybermen. I'm liking Enemy of the World and so on. But it's right up there. It's just behind them for me. You know, nothing disappointing here at all.
Yeah, it's probably my third as well.
Okay.
Behind Tomb and A Story Yet to Come. But yeah, I think it is a strong story in a strong season. Base Under Siege. I will give it confined area where they can't escape.
Yep.
I'll give it monster.
Yep.
Doesn't have futuristic setting.
Not at all.
And it doesn't have crazy base commander collapsing under the mental stress.
No. On balance, I'd say not.
I'll say not. It's got elements, but it's not your classic Base Under Siege.
No.
We'll bring it now to one of my top 2. I think Tomb is my top of this one, Rob. Mm-hmm. But Fury from the Deep is a very close second.
Okay, what do you like about it?
I just love the tension, and I love the characters, and I love the difference of it. It is a story that I came to first by novel, which is great, then by the audio. It was one of the first stories to be released on cassette. Mm-hmm. If you remember, Rob, back in the early 90s, they released The Macroterra and Evil of the Daleks on cassette. And in the very next bunch, they had Power of the Daleks and Fury from the Deep.
Right.
So it was one of the first stories out as an audio with that JNT scripted narration. It was not great, but that's okay. But this works so well as an audio. You feel isolated. You've got that heartbeat of the weed. You've got the screaming. You've got that wonderfully mysterious, almost Kubrick-esque scene on the beach as Mrs. Harris walks into the sea. It's so creepy and it's so interesting, and it keeps you gripped for 6 parts. I really, really love this one, Rob.
Well, it's amazing what the BBC phone machine can do for a story, Dave. I'll say that much.
And look, that is my worry, that if this was found, it would just be lots of people splashing around in the BBC phone machine. I do worry about that.
Yeah, I've never liked it to quite the extent you clearly do. I think it's interesting. I think that big novel that came out sort of piqued my interest in it and so on, but it never quite grabbed me as this big monster story, you know, when we think of A Tomb of the Cybermen, or we think of, you know, some of the others in this series like the Yeti and so on, or Ice Warriors. I think it's a more adult adventure, and I should probably reread that novel as an adult. I haven't read it again as an adult, because I think it might appeal to me more now as an adult. But as a kid, you know, seaweed, I wasn't that into it, to be honest.
And this is all very interesting, because to get back to the premise of our episode, I think this is undoubtedly a story where fandom's perceived collective view has gone down. When I was young, 30 years ago, this was seen as an absolute top 10 classic. Mm-hmm. And I think that was on the back of the novel, a few people's memories of having seen it as a kid, and also, to some extent, that soundtrack. The soundtrack really does work.
Do you think there was also elements like, oh, the Doctor's gets out the sonic screwdriver for the first time, or there was all those iconic pictures of the trio on the beach and all that? It's like in my head, I used to see pictures of them on the beach from Fury of the Deep far more than just about any other shot from the Troughton era.
Yeah, I think that could have been part of it. And I think that then it did fade a bit from people's memories. It was given a bit of a boost in the 90s when the censored clips came back. Its reputation went up a bit then, and I think it has faded now. And I think there is that sort of very cynical view from the sort of fans who do voice their opinion a lot of, well, if we found it, it wouldn't be as good, and in the end it all hinges on Victoria screaming, and it would just be the BBC phone machine. And look, maybe there is an element of that.
Well, I mean, you were saying that earlier.
Yeah, and I fully concede that last point, certainly. Look, I don't think the visuals would be that bad, but it is always a risk with the 1960s. Because we've got that off-screen few seconds from episode 6 as well, which does look, when I say off-screen, like the one where somebody pointed a video camera at the TV.
Yeah, film camera, yeah.
Yeah, those clips. There's about 6 seconds of part 6 of Fury there in the climax. And that does look pretty good. I think there's no doubt that Fury has had its reputation suffer in the last little while. And I think the fact that it also is 6th out of 7, and there is that where I think more and more proving to be mistaken, Rob, that it's just the next base Under Siege. We're tired of that by this stage. I think it's due for reevaluation. 69 in the DWM poll.
That's pretty good for it, I think.
Yeah, but it used to be up in the 20s.
Right. Yeah, well, see, 69 is about where I'd put it. So,
okay.
So I think that's pretty good in terms of where I would put it, yeah.
Base Under Siege. Now, it's in the open English countryside. They actually go away from the base, off to the beach and off to the oil rig, gas rig or whatever it is. So they're not confined. They're not really under siege. The base commander does go a bit troppo.
Yeah, I guess there are elements of this story that you can tick the base under siege box, but elements where you can't. It's a coin toss for me on this one, I think.
Yeah, it is another one a bit like Web of Fear that has some elements but not others. That said, although Mr. Robertson does go a bit troppo after he's stung by the weed, we get Megan Jones comes in.
Yes.
And she's the national executive of this gas company, and she kicks some ass.
Yeah. Yeah, and so you're going to link this back to our Tomb of the Cybermen, I think.
Yeah, we said there that we had a strong female character in Kaftan. We've got another one here in Megan Jones, and indeed we had Anne Travers in The Web of Fear. Yeah,
look, I completely agree. I love that Doctor Who did this, and people seem so surprised by it now. But they were already doing this 50 years ago. They've continued through. There's been great female characters in Doctor Who all along. I'm very proud of that.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And one thing I noticed when I had to rewatch The 10th Planet for another podcast yet to be released, but when I rewatched that, I was really impressed by the multi-ethnic crew they had at the Snowcap base.
Yep.
You know, they had an Australian astronaut, a Black American astronaut, all that sort of thing. But there literally were no women. But we're only 2 years later, and we've got some very strong female characters, and more again as we move into the last story of the season, the Wheel in Space.
Yes, absolutely. Shall we go there now?
Let's go there now. What's your perception of this one, Rob?
Well, Dave, it's a Cyberman story. So
It is.
So it instantly gets a couple of points out of 5 already from me just for being a Cyberman story. It's not the best Cyberman story, but then again, most Cyberman stories aren't. It does, however, introduce Zoe. It is in space. We get a new look Cyberman suit. I've always kind of liked this one. And
yeah,
I would say if we're talking fan perceptions, though, fan perceptions haven't been too high on it, I don't think. Now, you've probably got the figures in front of you, but my perception is it's not that well regarded.
177.
Christ, that's even worse than I thought. But
Yeah.
I didn't think it would be well regarded, but I like it.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of this as well. It was never perceived as being the classic of the season. I think
No.
Tomb and Ice Warriors and Web of Fear and Fury, they were always above it, and justifiably so. But I don't think it was seen as being the runt of the litter either, because it was that Cyberman story, and it was exciting. We grew up with all those pictures in the technical manual and the Radio Times 20th anniversary special, the servo robot, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you know, that was a bit interesting, and it again had a really good Terrence Dicks novel that came out. It was one of the later Terrence Dicks novels where he had a bit longer to do it and a bit more page count to do it with, and
a very rare novel too these days, Dave.
very rare, yes. Lovely cover as well.
Oh, gorgeous cover.
And I can remember the first time I saw parts 3 and 6, again at a club meeting. They had a Cyber Day and showed a whole lot of loose 1960s cyber episodes. So this, the Moon Base, 10th Planet, etc. And just loving it. Because, hey, it's Patrick Troughton and Cyberman guys. What more do you want? What more do you want?
Throw in Zoe. That's what more I want.
Yeah, exactly. I think it does suffer from the fact that, again, part 3 is the weakest of the episodes. I listened to this about a year ago on audio when I was driving around New York, upstate New York, I should say. I'm not sure how many people have driven around upstate New York listening to the Wheel in Space, but anyway. Certainly not the Hamptons. Anyway.
No.
Anyway. I'm diverting. I did find listening to it, it flowed a lot better. Episodes 1 and 2 are really good because you've got all that stuff on the Silver Carrier, you've got the servo robot, you've got introducing the crew, the first appearance of the Cybermats. That's all really good. Episode 3 is, again, that one where, having had the exciting introduction, you then slow things down a bit, you learn a bit more about what this thing is. You have all those exposition scenes. Yeah. You have the Doctor sort of learning what's going on. You have the Cybermen slowly starting to develop their plan. And it does slow down for part 3. I get that.
And unfortunately, 3 is one of the ones we actually have the full episode of.
Exactly. But then in parts 4 and 5, you get the Cybermen attacking the wheel and infiltrating the wheel, and all of the action goes through with that. You get Gemma Corwin sacrificing her life to make sure the Doctor knows to turn on the sexual air supply.
And we're missing those episodes.
Yeah, and we're missing those episodes. I think part 6 is actually quite good. We do have that one.
Yes.
So it is another one of those ones that I think does suffer from the episodes available.
Yes.
And actually, if it was found, to me, Rob, it's a bit like The Chase.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, is The Chase the weakest of the 60s Dalek stories? Well, yes. But that's okay, because they're all bloody brilliant.
Yeah.
Is The Wheel in Space the weakest of the 60s Cyberman stories? Yeah, it probably is. But it's the weakest of a really good bunch. You disagree, Rob?
I'd maybe say the Moon Base is weaker than this.
Oh, really? Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. And that's because I quite like this story. Maybe they're on par with each other.
Well, there you go. I mean, even if it's sort of the equal weakest, well, that's of a really good bunch.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think this is criminally underrated.
Yeah, I agree with you absolutely. It's still not like top of the pops for this season for me at all, but it's not an own goal. It's right up there. It might be 4th in this season for me.
Yeah, look, it's fourth or fifth for me. And if this is fourth or fifth in a season, that's a pretty strong season in my view.
Oh, absolutely. And again, I'll mention it again. We meet Zoe in this story, Dave, and she is a great companion and a great character in general.
It is. So we'll talk about that companion thing in a moment, because I think that needs its own little discussion.
Okay.
But we need to wrap up the Wheel in Space. We both said it's really good. Certainly better than being 177th in the poll.
Yes.
I will have to say, though, I think that this is the one quintessential base under siege in the season.
And I think that's completely fair, and I think there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, the Wheel is isolated. The Cybermen are a classic Troughton monster. It is futuristic. It does have that wonderful multi-ethnic crew, including some really good women characters there. Mm-hmm. Not least of all, of course, being Zoe. And it does have a base commander who goes completely bonkers.
Yeah, unequivocally a base under siege.
But so let's just finish on that thought before we go on to the companions. Of the 7 stories, there's only one that we've said is an unequivocal tick every box base under siege story.
Yes.
Well, that's that myth shattered.
All right, Adam.
But I'm absolutely serious. They are very different plots. They're very different locations.
Yeah.
You've got a wide variety of monsters. You've got Cybermen bookending it. You've got the Yeti in there. You've got weed creatures. You've got Salamander. You've got Ice Warriors. It's so many classic things, and I do not for a moment accept that this is the same story again and again and again with a different monster.
No, it's not at all. But, tempering this season being absolutely great, can we segue into the companions?
We can. So I started this segment, Rob, saying that my very vivid memory was that 30 years ago, the Doctor and Jamie and Victoria was considered the classic TARDIS team.
Yes.
Is that the case now?
No.
Definitely not. Where do you... Go on.
And I'll tell you my perception. Growing up, I was obviously reading the target novels of most of these stories before I had any hope of seeing them at all, either through dodgy videos or through proper releases, or even through audio. And in print, and looking at still photos that seemed quite iconic to me, I thought they were a really great team. And to this day, if I go and put myself back in the shoes of that, however old I was, 11 years old, 12 years old, yeah, I thought, this is just perfect. He's got these 2 companions from the past, and one's a boy and one's a girl, and they have these personalities, and it's just wonderful. But the more I would see of it, the more I would absolutely think that Victoria was a weak link, and just not interesting to watch, screamed far too much, and I just couldn't get behind as a companion in the way that I can get behind, I don't know, other companions, even other companions who scream, like a Joe Grant or someone like that. I just can't get behind Victoria. I think Jamie is a fantastic companion, but this team, no. The more I saw of it as it was meant to be seen, i.e. on television, I fell away from it big time.
Was your problem Victoria the character or Debbie Watling the actress?
Sad as it is to say, I've got to say it's probably Watling as the actress, because she's bringing the character to life.
Okay, that's really interesting. I agree with you, certainly, that this is now the fan perception, that she's actually a very poor companion. And some people go as far as to say she's very badly acted. I definitely push back against the idea that she is badly acted. Yes, there are some stories where she is not as good, and you certainly see that pressure of churning out Doctor Who week after week does get to Watling at times. I think in Tomb of the Cybermen, she's really good. In Abominable Snowman, she's really good. Fury from the Deep, she's really good. I think she does struggle in the middle, and I think that is a reflection of when the character is written poorly. In Tomb, she's given a bit of agency, a bit of independence, and even gets to have a few snarky lines at times. Same in Fury from the Deep, same in Enemy of the World. The Ice Warriors, though, she literally is a peril monkey who is just there to scream. And so there is an underwriting of the character. I do accept that. I don't think it's as bad as some people say. I accept that it's not as good as legend has it. And I think particularly now that almost all of Season 6 is available to view, other than, 5 episodes of The Space Pirates and 2 episodes of Invasion, we get to see all of Zoe Harriet, and I do agree that put up against Zoe, Victoria does look the weaker for it.
I think so. I think Zoe has a more modern feel to her. You know, she gets to be the clever clogs and say really smart-ass stuff to people because she's just clever. And that kind of fits with the way a Buffy-type character is written, or some of the characters on Riverdale, for example. She just seems more modern and more with it, you know? No.
Yeah, I could see her fitting in on Babylon 5, for example.
Absolutely. Yeah. She's modern, she's smart, you know, and it's not just that she's from the future, she just is so different to the Victoria character.
Yeah. Yeah, and I wonder to an extent as well how much it is that sort of that pendulum opinion where if you take Victoria from, okay, she's not the legendary best companion ever status, and you have to take it back, there is a bit of sort of overswing to, well, she's terrible. And maybe in a few years' time, it will settle down and go, she has some good stories. She has some less good stories.
Yeah, look, hopefully. Because I think as a person, Debbie Watling seemed just amazing and a bit bonkers and a lot of fun, you know, when you watch her in interviews and stuff.
Yeah, I met her a few years ago, and yeah, very much so.
Yeah, no.
And alongside all of them, of course, Fraser Hines as Jamie.
Indeed, who has recently been out for Supernova here in Australia. I didn't go and see him. But
no, I've seen him in a couple of cons. I didn't see him this time he was out.
Yeah. But yeah, look, I think it's cliche, but I think he's the perfect companion for Pat Troughton. And it was great that he stayed so long in the role because we got to see a lot of him.
Yeah, look, I think one thing that has been consistent in fandom opinion is that Fraser Hines as Jamie is superb, and there's a reason why that has been so consistent for so many decades.
Yeah, I don't think we need to say more on that.
No, and indeed you could say the same about Troughton himself. I do not think there is a poor performance by Troughton in any of these stories.
Yeah, although, you know, in the last 12 months, I've started to get the feeling that some people are getting the wobbles with him, or maybe getting a bit put off that he's always regarded as the Doctor, and he's the governor, you know, none better. All the other doctors think he's the governor, you know, full stop. I think there might be some pushback coming against that. I'm not sure how far it'll get, though.
Yeah, I felt a bit of that coming over the last few years. I think a lot of it has been more of a pushback against his era, particularly this season, as we've been discussing tonight. But I think there is, as you say, a little bit of a pushback there. And sometimes it is that unfortunate thing of, well, you need to diminish one to build up another.
Yeah, and also just that feeling of if something's getting really, really praised or really, really panned, there's a kind of contrary person who will stick up for the underdog. You know, the more Colin Baker got panned, the quicker we got to people saying, oh no, Colin Baker's amazing and his costume is fantastic and his portrayal is great and he was so hard done by, and, you know, and defending every single thing.
Yeah.
There's not that sort of sensible centre where we like to be, where it's like, well, he's been brilliant in this story, but he is absolutely appalling in this story. You know, being able to say both ways about him.
Yeah, I mean, the famous 90s pushback with some big-name fans against John Pertwee, for example. You know, there was no quicker way to make a bit of a name for yourself with a bit of notoriety in fandom than write an article about how John Pertwee was actually not God.
Yeah, indeed.
You do get those sort of tensions. So overall, Rob, what's your feeling about this season, and where do you think its reputation should be?
I quite like it. I think there's more than enough here to put it in, you know, a very likeable sort of category of Doctor Who in general. In terms of Troughton's seasons, I almost want to say it could be his best.
I think unquestionably it is his best. I don't think it's got all of his best stories. There are some great stories elsewhere. I mean, let's face it, Evil of the Daleks and Power of the Daleks aren't in this season. The War Games isn't in this season. Invasion isn't in this season. There are some, but you know, hit for hit, I think this is the strongest because.
Yeah, and I say that despite Victoria being there and what I've just said about her, in terms of just the stories and just the way it fits together, I think it's great.
I think it's great too, and maybe it's time for fandom to have a bit of a re-evaluation the other way.
Yeah, well, at least come to the sensible centre.
That's right, but look, to wrap it all up, I do think it's fascinating how received wisdom has gone up and down on this thing, and it's a fascinating thing to watch fandom at work sometimes.
It is indeed. I'm glad we skipped through these. I mean, obviously there's a number of stories here, so we skipped through them pretty quick. But just to tease out a few themes, like, is it base under siege? You know, what do we feel about it and so on? I think we've got a pretty good handle on this season now.
Yeah, I'm very happy. It is a favourite of mine. I thought it needed some defending, and I've enjoyed defending it.
Excellent. Well, what did you out there think about it? If you've got any strong thoughts, one way or the other, or maybe you're in the sensible centre, who knows? Drop us a line on Twitter or Facebook, or email hello@thedwshow.net and let us know.
Please do. I'm really, really interested to hear what people think about this season now.